Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I am Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are breaking down the Buffalo Bills 2024 offseason. We're going to be going over all the departures, acquisitions, and also reviewing their draft picks. We're going to review the depth chart as it stands right now, June 20th. And then at the very end of the video, we're going to be breaking down their 2024 schedule and giving our record prediction for the Buffalo Bills this season. So be sure to stay tuned in for the entire video. But before we do that, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to get notified when we create new content. We are in the middle of our off-season recap series, and we have videos coming out Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. So when you want to see future recap videos, or once when the season starts, see Buffalo Bills prediction videos, be sure to ring that bell to get notified when new videos come out. So, Ryan, let's pull this up here. I think the Bills, to me, it was really fun watching the Bills the second half of the season because we've been doing this for, 3 years now? 3.5 years
Yeah, I think it's
now?
our third season.
Yeah, and so and we still suck. But they finally started playing the way, like we were saying, like the Bills, like if they can figure out how to run the ball like traditionally, like through the tackles, and they did that. And man, that Dallas Cowboys game where they just ran all over them. I think what was their passing yards for that game? I think it was something hysterical. I think Josh
like
Allen only
80.
had like 70 yards or something like that. But they found something. James Cook, Joe Brady. Yeah, it was Joe Brady, right?
Yeah, Joe Brady.
Whichever offensive coordinator was. Sorry, because I know they changed halfway through the season. Yep, Joe Brady. Yes, did a phenomenal job, and he's coming back this year as well. It's going to be very interesting because it's going to be a whole new look for the skill position players in the Buffalo team. But we're going to get to that here in a second. But top 10 offense in nearly every single category as well. Much improved offensive line, I think, which helped out a lot in the running game as well. Turnovers were an issue. I think a lot of that was early on in the season with Josh Allen. I think, especially too, like that first game with the Jets when Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles, just a lot of just bonehead mistakes there. But in general, though, hopefully, like you have to get that cleaned up. Especially too, I just traded for him in my dynasty league, so please, Josh Allen, don't throw any interceptions. Defensively, though, I think that's the thing that was impressive to me the most because they had a couple of major injuries, especially in the secondary, but it didn't really seem to stall them at all. And so I thought that was very interesting as well. Still had a top 10 defense all around and even top 5 in some areas. What is your thoughts kind of on this Bills team entering this 2024 offseason and kind of just overall thoughts on what the Bills are currently looking like?
Yeah, so on the offensive side of the ball, I think they should just kind of keep building on what they were doing at the end of 2023, kind of like what you said. They actually inserted a downhill running game like we had been saying for 3 years. Like we should get some money for that. Because Josh Allen running for 860 yards a season and being your leading rusher is not a recipe for long-term success with your franchise quarterback. That's how he gets hurt. That's how his career gets shortened. And then also that creates just another level that defenses have to defend instead of, all right, well, they're going to drop back. Josh Allen is either going to throw it or scramble. So we just have to keep contained. Now you actually have to worry about rushing lanes and things. And then they can insert play action packages off of that, which I think are fantastic. So I think this offense will get into what I think about some of the moves they made this offseason on the departures tab up next. But on the defensive side of the ball, I had a lot of concerns. They had like negative 30 million, negative 50 million in cap space coming into this offseason. And they had a lot of defensive guys that were up for new contracts. And they actually were able to retain most of them, which is good for the Bills. And so I'm curious to kind of see how they can keep everybody staying productive and keep these production numbers up, because these are really good production numbers. So,
Yeah, no, especially too. I think the thing that I really like as well, kind of even look at the sacks numbers here. So like Leonard Floyd had 10.5, Ed Oliver had 9.5, Terrell Bernard had 6.5, 6.5 for AJ Espinosa, 5 for Gregory Rousseau. Then a lot of guys had a couple of sacks, and then they're even just single digit sacks as well. So I think very spread out and balanced, and not top heavy for like one guy. You know, like if you lose this guy, it's like it's game over. And so I think that's the thing. And we've talked about it a lot as well, especially kind of during this offseason recap series, is you can have a solid defensive line, above average defensive line. It can make up for maybe some of inefficiencies or injuries in the secondary. But if it's the other way around, that defensive line that just gets pushed around, trust me, as a Falcons fan, it's had horrible defensive lines these past couple of years. Like, there's only so much a really good secondary can do. Is because those guys, they just can't cover receivers for that long. There's no pass rush. So I think that's helping the Bills out a lot, beefing up the trenches on both sides of the ball. They really help with the success for the Bills team in the 2023 season. So let's move on, though, now to the departures. As you mentioned, a couple of big names here. Mitch Morris, I think, is the one. The starting center for the entirety of the season. Losing Jordan Poyer. And so if you watch the Miami video, you'll know Ryan's opinions about Jordan Poyer moving on. It's a good thing that he moved on. I'm just kidding. I'm just playing around. But
I look at the good thing. When you have a 34-year-old safety, you might want to look elsewhere for somebody to play.
And they did. And so losing I think the biggest thing, though, losing Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs, their top two receivers yard-wise last year, with Stephon Diggs over 1,100 yards, Gabe Davis over 700 yards. And then Leonard Floyd, their sack leader as well. As I just mentioned, these are some key players here, especially statistically. If you're going with the Moneyball approach, like how are you going to replace those numbers? How are you going to replace 10.5 sacks from Leonard Floyd, 1,800 receiving yards from your top two receivers? 100% of the snaps really from Mitch Morris, your starting center. Those are going to be some of the numbers. It's going to be interesting to see how they are able to replace that once the season starts. In general, though, what do you think of the other people that they have moved on from as well, and how big of a loss is it as a whole?
Yeah, so Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs are the two names that stick out to me on the offensive side of the ball. Trent Sherfield, I guess, kind of falls into that category, but I think his production will be much more easily replaced. When we get into the acquisitions, we can talk a little bit about the guys that they brought in, but when you get a receiver of the caliber of Stephon Diggs, I think that is so hard to move on from. And I understand he could be a locker room nuisance. He might have been requesting a trade from behind the scenes. I just think you do whatever you have to do to keep a guy at that skill level. So I don't really agree with moving on from him. The Gabe Davis one, I could understand both sides of it. Again, you had that receiver in your offense that can perform at a starter level most of the time. I know he had some inconsistencies here or there, and he didn't take the leap that Bills fans wanted him to, but still, I think is a NFL caliber receiver that was a good complement to the number one receiver that you already have. And so moving on from these guys, I thought was a little interesting. But again, I'm not an NFL GM, so
yeah. I get it. Especially too, because I'm pretty sure Stephon Diggs is in a contract year, right? Like this is 1 year deal.
Yeah. Well, no, he had more years, but then Houston renegotiated his contract, so he'd become a free agent after this year.
Gotcha. Now, so
yeah,
I think it works out to me. I think and we'll get to their offensive depth chart, but I think kind of the rise of Khalil Shakur, I think the rise of Dalton Kincaid, I think the rise of James Cook, they're going to replace his overall yards in a different way than what it was when he was 1,500, 1,600 receiving yards every single season. And so I think Gabe Davis, I think they've already kind of essentially replaced him long-term with what Keon Coleman will turn into. I feel like that's kind of a similar role. I think you do lose some of the locker room leadership because Gabe Davis, I think he was always laying down good blocks. Just a good teammate, it seemed like, as a whole as well. So you kind of move on from that. But it's a loss. Yeah, it's kind of a shocking loss. But at the same time, I think they'll bounce back just because I didn't really give the Bills that much of a chance last year, and they proved me wrong. So I think with what Doug McDermott and also Josh Allen as well, leadership-wise, I think they'll figure out this offense. It's a long season. Huh?
You mean Sean McDermott?
Sean McDermott. Doug McDermott. Yeah. He's an actor, isn't he? I think
no, that's Dougie McBuckets on the Pacers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's also
Sean McDermott. But my thing was you have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. You never know what's going to happen. Now you don't have Stephon Diggs. And I think this is a good transition into the acquisitions. is so they went out and they kind of just threw a bunch of money at 4 wide receivers to see if one of them could come in and stick. And I think Curtis Samuel probably will. The other 3 guys I don't have a lot of hope for. Mitch Trubisky's back. They got La'el Collins as well. And then they brought in Will Clapp at the center position. I think he's more of a depth piece, though. Edge rushers wise, they did lose a couple. So they brought in Dwayne Smoot, Casey Toohill, Austin Johnson, and then Deshaun Williams in the interior. Deion Jones, Nicholas Morrow, Mike Edwards, D. Delaney, and then KJ Hamler as well. So 5 total receivers, a few secondary guys, and then some other, I think, like potential rotational defensive players there. So not really any big names for me in free agency.
I know all these receivers. I agree with
Yeah.
you. Curtis Samuel is the guy to me that I think actually, and when we get to the depth chart here in a second, well, he's penciled in as a starter.
Yeah.
And so I actually think that's going to be very interesting to see how he does because I kind of liked him in that Washington system here. And also he provided some good numbers. I think it's him and Jahan Dotson were essentially kind of almost the same person. So I think him moving over here, I think it's going to be a good compliment to Josh Allen and Khalil Shakur and whatnot. I will say, I think Mac Hollins has shown some light. Like he didn't have any last year in Atlanta, but that was because of the offensive system. Chase Claypool seems to still be not trying to figure out what he's trying to do. MVS, I think he's just going to be a consistent veteran. You kind of know what you're going to get from him. He'll probably go get 400 or 500 yards.
I disagree with that. He had a lot of drops in Kansas City last year. And so, I mean, I think he can get open. It's just whether he can catch it or not.
That's kind of a big deal to be an NFL receiver. So,
yeah.
in general, though, I think it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of it is going to depend on how Keon Coleman develops. Because if he can be the guy that and utilize his athleticism and kind of really open up the field, I think that opens up the underneath for Khalil Shakur, Dalton Kincaid. I think guys that Josh Allen's really going to lean on this year. Khalil Shakur took a giant leap forward. I think in his overall production last season. I think he's potentially could be on path just because he might be the number 1 receiver here. To be on track for a 1,000-yard season. We'll have to kind of wait and see and just kind of see how he keeps on developing. But I think they'll figure it out. As I've said, like I didn't have any faith in them last year, and they figured it out. And so wouldn't be surprised if they are running the ball a lot more and they are a little more of a run-heavy offense. Kind of like how we've been saying over the past couple of years, how we started off this show. I think defensively, I think they're going to be absolutely fine. I think their whole defense is going to run around that front 7. I think their secondary. I think they're going to figure out their secondary, and those pieces are going to fall into place as well.
Yeah, and I agree. I think they will figure it out. The one thing that concerns me is they are placing a lot of hope on the Keon Coleman pick, and I was just not high on him coming into the draft process. He is not a explosive athlete. He is a smooth athlete, and he really struggles to separate at the top of the route. And some of that is he's only 21, but other parts of that is like he doesn't move as well as some of the other guys in this class. And then he was a jump ball receiver, but he only caught like 30% of his contested catch opportunities, where as a guy that's 6'5", 215, you really want him to be winning 60+% of those. And so, and then again, just his overall separation statistics, which are pretty good at predicting wide receiver success, were not favorable. So that to me, I think moving on from Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs and targeting a guy like Keon Coleman the way that they did, that is concerning for me just based off of my draft evaluation. But again, I hope it works out. They look to be doing more of like a wide receiver by committee approach, but yeah. And then I do like some of their other picks as well.
Well, and I think that's a good segue then into also another one, Will Clapp. Well, I think it's a great segue into their offensive depth chart here. But I think that they're getting some just overall good depth as well for just their offensive line, as we're going to say, getting Will Clapp. But in general, though, I think to me, kind of looking at this, I think the interesting storyline to me is kind of what's going to be their offensive formation, because I think they're probably going to go into 12 personnel. I would think so. The one running back, 2 tight ends with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. They're getting a lot more time. Dawson Knox might line up more as an inline tight end, while Dalton Kincaid is going to line up as a slot. But then you could then rotate out Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakur and Keon Coleman, or even to going to your point, that kind of receiver by committee as well. But I think the main base of it is going to be probably Dalton Kincaid in the slot, Dawson Knox probably on lining up as an inline tight end, and that allow for them to run the ball a lot more. And at the same time, then too, you can bring in some of these receivers here as well. So I think that'll be interesting just to see, for storyline wise, what is going to be their offensive formation. Because I agree with you, just with this receiving room right here, they're probably not going to go for like a 4 receiver set that often. I don't think they're going to do that.
No, and that's me. I think I agree. Also, Dalton Kincaid was one of their leading receivers last year. Is also their first round pick from 2023. Sorry. And so they probably are going to want to get him fairly heavily involved. He had a good rookie year. Dawson Knox has been a good tight end also throughout his career. And again, like Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel are good, I think, second and third options. I just don't know if Keon Coleman is the number 1 option. Yeah. So that's going to be interesting. I do think that they will figure it out. I think they learned so much last year when they moved on. Matt Canada was with the Steelers. I forget their original offensive coordinator's name, but when they moved on to Joe Brady, I think they learned so much about this offense and being able to run the ball downhill and setting up the rest of.
And it was Ken Dorsey.
That's what it was. Yeah.
So that's offensively. I think defensively for me, not too much is going to change really from that front 7. They did bring in some other guys, that to replace, such as like Austin Johnson, whatnot, Deshaun Williams. Like, see how they end up fitting in, provide some of that depth piece. But to me, I think it's just curious how the secondary is just going to shape up moving on from Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White as well. But Tre'Davious White had been injured a lot, so a lot of the younger guys that they drafted have gotten some playing time as well. Just seeing what that starting lineup is going to be. But in general, though, there's not too much outside of the Jordan Poyer one. I think this is going to be the biggest hit in the secondary that they're going to have to figure out and replace. So it's who steps up into that role. Is it going to be Taylor? Is it going to be Taylor Rapp? How does Cole Bishop, who's currently slotted in as the starting free safety, how does he end up sliding in there? Is there going to be a battle there between him and D. Delaney, who they got in free agency? So I think just seeing how the secondary shapes up. But in general, though, numbers-wise, I still expect them to have one of the top 10 defense, especially too when it comes to sacks and pressures, just because I really like this front 7 and how it's molded together.
Yeah, I am interested to see how the secondary comes together. I am curious is Von Miller still on the roster? Yeah, I see him. He's actually slotted in as AJ Epenesa's backup. I'm curious to see how much of an impact he has. I think we saw a big dip in production from him last year. And just kind of this defense overall. They did a really good job. I think you mentioned this at the beginning, of spacing out a lot of their defensive production across all parts of the defensive front. And so curious to kind of see if Sean McDermott can do that again with this team. So let's move on to their 2024 schedule. Fairly easy first 3 games, not so easy second 3 games. So Arizona at Miami, that one I guess is tough actually. And then Jacksonville at home on Monday Night Football. They get an extra long rest there. I do think that they would be favored against Jacksonville, but then a little bit of a gauntlet at Baltimore on Sunday Night Football, at Houston, and then at the New York Jets in weeks 4, 5, and 6. So that's a pretty tough start for them, especially 4 out of 6 games are on primetime. So
yeah, it's going to be a very unique start to the season here. And so I agree, even too as well, that Arizona team, I would bet on the Bills, but still, it's going to be very interesting with Marvin Harrison Jr. and then how hard they were playing under Jonathan Gannon last year. And I want to even double check too, just to make sure I got that correctly. Yeah, they have 3 straight away games, 2 of them which are on prime time. So it's kind of a unique way to start off the season, 4 primetime games and then 3 in a row away games as well. So luckily, it's at least the Jets. It's still it's not really in the same state, so never mind. But I think this is going to be a pretty tough start to the schedule because week 1 to play Arizona, I think is going to be very interesting. Just go and see. I still have them favored. I still think that they can come out 3-3 during the stretch, but it'll be interesting to see how this Buffalo team and kind of this new look Buffalo team ends up doing during the stretch, because it's not going to be kind of what you were talking about, like let's rely on Stephon Diggs, just with his offensive explosion capabilities. I think it's going to be a lot more run heavy. Going to have to rely on the defense a lot more. But then they do get, I would say, a little bit of a break with Tennessee at Seattle. Then they host Miami, and then at Indianapolis. And then always the fun matchup here with Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen in Week 11. Yeah. They get to host KC, and they go on a little bye here before they have a pretty fun 3-week stretch there coming back. But let's talk about all the games before the bye, before I talk about the rest. But I think this is going to be that part of the schedule where I think Buffalo starts to roll. I wouldn't be surprised if actually they have a losing record going in when they play Tennessee, if they're 2-4, just with how tough that schedule is. But I think they can get on a roll here, get back to 500 going into that Kansas City game, and who knows what can happen with that game. They go on that bye. But what are your thoughts on that kind of before we wrap up their schedule?
Yeah, so they should, I think, go on a good 3-4 game stretch there to start off that second column. Kansas City is going to be a coin flip. I think both teams made some offseason moves, lost a few pieces as well. And so it'd be interesting to see those games. I think the last 3 times those teams have played, it's been the team has won by a field goal or less. And so that's always a great game. And then a Week 12 bye, I think, is right in a perfect spot for a Buffalo team that's going to be wanting to make a late playoff push. However, coming out of the bye, San Francisco at Los Angeles Rams, at Detroit, 3 powerhouse NFC teams that are going to be ready to go. They're going to be in midseason form, and
I will say
that's a tough stretch.
The only positive I could see in those 3 stretches is the fact that Rams game is really going to be a home game for them. I mean, the place can be decked out with Bills fans. No, there are no Rams fans in Los Angeles. But still very tough, though. I mean, very tough team to go and play, especially then, too, coming off San Francisco Sunday Night Football at Detroit. All 3 of those teams, I think, are potential Super Bowl contenders or can represent at least the NFC out of the Super Bowl, in the Super Bowl, let's say the least. But I will say favorable final 3 games. No offense, Ryan, but New England, New York Jets, and then at New England. Jets has a caveat just because we really don't know how good they're going to be, how Aaron Rodgers is going to bounce back, whatnot. So that one is kind of up in the air. We'll have to see how good they really are. But New England, though, I think it's going to be very interesting. I would much rather prefer to play Drake May and kind of this New England team early on in the season while I still getting to see legs wet. But still, though, I think you guys will be favored in that matchup. And I think, too, that's where if you can still be around 500 going into this stretch, or maybe a little bit above 500, say that's 15 games. So if you're it's 14 games, sorry. So if you're 7-7 or 8-6, like, I really like your chances to win those next 3 games in that portion of the season. And I think that's what I think that to me is going to be division winning record there, at minimum, at least a wild card spot in the playoffs.
Yeah. And so I think that's a good kind of segue into our record prediction. So I had them at 9-8. Barring those last 3 games, and then I guess that middle stretch, the Bills, they have a really tough schedule. The AFC East has the toughest opponents by win percentage, and like I just am not. I look at what they did on the offense side of the ball. They moved on from two of their top receivers. They brought in Keon Coleman as what I think the fans view as a number one. They're going to do wide receiver by committee. I think that makes this offense maybe a little bit more one dimensional. And maybe I'm underestimating the playmaking ability of Josh Allen a little bit. But I think this offense might regress a little bit. And then I still felt that this defense performed better on paper than they did like on the actual eye test. And so that for me, I think, is a little bit of cause for concern. And with those concerns, I think that they have just such a tough schedule. In this division, I think the Jets are going to be a lot better if they can stay healthy. I think the Patriots are improved. Not to say that like they're good enough to consistently be able to beat the Bills, but like I think if the Bills sleep on them like they did in Week 5 last year, that could very much repeat itself. And then Miami, I mean, who knows what version of Miami that they're going to get. So it's a tough division. They have a really tough schedule, and so it's. I think the Bills they could be really good. They could also, I think, be average.
Yeah, and that's why I think if you haven't seen the Miami video yet, or even our Jets one, and so I had Miami also go 10-7. I had the Jets go 9-8 because I really think it's just going to be such a tight knit battle to the finish. I think between those three teams to win the division, I think that they're going to be beating each other. And I think then they're going to lose games against some of the other top AFC teams. And I think they're just going to be right there in the middle. And so I think Buffalo, they can win this division. It might come down to a tiebreaker over Miami or over New York. I think what I like about Buffalo more than I like about Miami is Buffalo can find ways to beat the top tier playoff teams, while Miami, it's like they're the one trick pony. So that's why I think they don't favor up well against a San Francisco, for example, or a Houston, so to say, just because they have one way to win or that's it. While Buffalo, on the other hand, they can run the ball all over you now. Let's see this. They need to keep doing that consistently. I want to see them keep doing that. You still have Josh Allen, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, in the backfield, kind of running the show back there. They did move on from Stephon Diggs, but I think Dalton Kincaid's going to take a solid step forward in his sophomore tight end season. I think Khalil Shakur is making the right strides. I think you have good veteran receivers who maybe know their roles, know their responsibilities, and know how to work with the quarterback, especially to a veteran quarterback like Josh Allen. So I think there's multiple ways I think Buffalo can win against these playoff teams, which I think can give them the advantage, especially when it comes later on into the season.
Yeah, and so I want to highlight one thing too. We talked a little bit about them doing the wide receiver by committee also. I think Josh Allen not making mistakes is going to be essential to this wide receiver core and this offense as a whole.
Yeah,
being successful, because before they had the playmakers outside to kind of overcome it, they don't have that anymore. And I think you look at the beginning of last year, Josh Allen in this offense, they were making mistakes left and right, and he would get loose with the football, he'd chuck it up into double coverage to hope somebody would come down with it. Whatever. He needs to be much more precise and concise in his decision making and where he's going with the football for this receiver by committee to work. And so I think that is what will make or break this offense.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch, to go and see, because we've seen Josh Allen and the Bills take the right steps it seems like every single year. They just can't. They can just barely not get over or really past the Chiefs. And so now then this whole new look of this team, offensively specifically, I think it's going to be interesting to see how he does as a leader of the team, face of the franchise. And I have full confidence in him. I traded for him on my dynasty team, so he better figure it out. And so, but when in doubt, run the ball. Do the exact opposite of what I've said. Josh, you need to have 1,200 rushing yards. No, I'm just kidding. But I think they'll figure it out. I have faith in them. We've seen them kind of overcome this adversity of even playing bad, and yet still they're always there. They're always playing into mid-January, late January sometimes even. So I think they'll figure it out. I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to be neck and neck with them and the Dolphins for the division. So
Mhm.
let's go ahead and wrap this one up here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Buffalo Bills 2024 offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? What do you think of the Keon Coleman pick? I know he has some great funny clips, but what do you think the Bills record is going to be? And on that, we will see you guys next time.